Good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is titled, A Vendor-Neutral Solution for Managing Disparate Clinical Trial Data. My name is Nima and I'll be your X Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require any assistance, please contact me at any time by sending a message using this chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for future download. At this point, I'd like to thank Y-Prime, who helped to develop the content for this presentation. With more than a decade of focused work with eClinical systems, Y-Prime is a provider of technology and services that unify diverse data sources and improve clinical trial data management. Cloud-based interactive response technology and electronic clinical outcome assessment platforms enable greater speed, precision, and integration in clinical trial management. Data services tools help sponsors bring together siloed clinical research data into contextual information that they can act on. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for this event. Sean Blackburn. Since co-founding Y-Prime, Sean has led the company growth from a two-person consulting firm to a global organization that focuses on eClinical technologies and data challenges. Sean has an extensive background in systems architecture and information management. Jamie Cook. Jamie Cook is Executive Vice President of Consulting. In this role, he leads Y-Prime's efforts to help biopharmaceutical companies get more from their data assets. As co-founder, Jamie has held a number of leadership roles, including development of the company's business consulting and customer care functions. And now, without further ado, I'd like to hand control over to our first speaker. Sean, you may begin the presentation when you are ready.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Nima. I believe everyone should be able to see my screen. We would like to actually start the presentation with a polling question.
All right, everyone, so our polling question has been launched on the screen, and our question here is, does your company currently integrate its clinical systems? And we have three options here: no, yes, but the process needs improvement, and yes. So I encourage all audience members to vote in real time, and we'll take a look at the results. All right, perfect. It looks like most of the audience members have voted. Let's take a look at the results. All right, so 24% of audience members have selected no. 53% of audience members have selected yes, but the process needs improvement. And 24% of audience members have selected yes. Now back to you, Sean.
Thank you again, Nima. So it sounds pretty typical with organizations in our industry. A lot of us are continuing to look at better ways to handle all of the massive amounts of systems and data that we deal with every day. And so for this webinar, we were hoping to cover a few topics. Really, our goal is to share our ideas based on our experiences over the last 15 to 20 years and provide the audience members information that they can take forward and hopefully find successful ways to integrate data across clinical studies. So today, I'd like to take a quick look back at some of the challenges and history of how we've experienced evolving integration platforms. And then we'd like to also discuss some of our ideas of how we're taking modern technologies to improve the overall experience for our business clinical users. So first, I'd like to start with today. And just in the last 6 to 9 months, Y-Prime has listed basically 20 to 21 systems that we typically go in and help companies manage the integration challenges with. These are the generalized terms for those systems. I won't go ahead and read them all for you, and I'm sure most of you are dealing with these either through your own platforms or through your vendors, CROs, and other partners that you work with. And certainly it it reminds us of just a wired mess like you see in the illustration there. Now, what that leads us to is how we start looking at the future. And I know everybody is talking about a lot of different technologies and can't wait to get there. Big data is certainly something that's coming. So certainly with the systems that are coming available in the next 3 to 5 years, electronic healthcare records, medical records, wearables, genomics, what's the integration platform going to look like? We don't want to get into situations and influence our clients to collect any data that is not necessary to go with their clinical trials, but we do want to help them find ways to figure out what data that is going to be beneficial to put into submissions for getting new medications approved. So before I go too far, I just wanted to share another story. When Jamie and I got into the industry around the late 90s, early 2000s, one of the big events that we would experience working at, mid-sized biotechs like a company called Cephalon, where we both worked about 15 years ago. I was on Fridays. They would literally get excited to stand around the fax machine and receive enrollment reports via fax Friday afternoon around 3 o'clock. They would then take all of these, one fax at a time. Somebody would enter it into a spreadsheet, they would print it out, and they would hand deliver it to senior management. If it was a good week, then those days they would pop up a couple bottles of wine and celebrate with some wine and cheese. And if it was a bad week, they would just move on to Monday. Around that time, we were actually really excited when we were able to integrate a write fax system into that, and we thought that was really cool. And I think things have just come a long way since then. So some of the challenges that we've dealt with quite extensively over the last 15 years really comes down to 3 categories: data silos, the risks associated with not having the appropriate integration strategy in place, and the waste that you often see, and probably ask why we do things that way. So as most of you know, you've probably heard the term data silos. And the one thing that we notice is continually most of the systems that we build for a clinical study to align with your clinical trial protocol are really focused on data collection. And so we end up really hurrying up in the process from receiving that final protocol to building your IRT, your EDC, your eCOA systems, all based on the protocol needs and not looking at the overall ecosystem. So by the time you go live, we've seen it over and over where many systems go live and then we start working on the integrations after that. So what happens is in the immediate term, the teams end up using Excel, and Excel is a very powerful business tool and everybody uses it, and I don't have a problem with it. But when you lose credibility towards the source systems because they're not aligned with what they're reporting, and you're having your teams really grind through downloading and consolidating the data in Excel, Excel becomes its own system. Certainly there's a lot of overlap across these systems, and there's certainly unique things. And so as we look at integration strategies, as Jamie will discuss, we try and help really companies start with a data governance approach that allows them to think holistically across the enterprise, and then really pinpoint how they want to take the next steps to start building out their integration platform. And the last piece with silos is people become silos. Certainly study managers really get to know their data, they get to know the investigators, they know who's what, how things work, and if those people end up moving around, all of that data walks away with them. So again, the risks associated with that data siloed world that we live in is there's potential for loss if different versions of spreadsheets get put around there. If somebody overwrites the study tracker template that's on the file share drive somewhere, if data is bad in our world today, certainly we hand data to CEOs or chief medical officers who potentially could take that information, discuss with investors, Wall Street, and communicating out of date or inaccurate data is certainly something that is a very high risk. without proper integration, it's hard to be consistent, it's hard to be repeatable, and that really hampers the ability to hire and grow your workforce and train them over and over on where to find pieces of data, information to make decisions off of. Waste is certainly something that we want to help people avoid. A lot of time is really the biggest factor we see over and over working across many different companies. Sometimes we even see medical monitors spending multiple hours a week focusing on actually cutting and pasting in Excel, and then by the time they get this figured out, the data becomes out of date or stale. It's certainly not a solution that you want in place for your high-priced medical folks that went to school for many, many years and have a vast amount of experience. If we can get the right data at their fingertips, quickly, accurately, repeatable over and over, it certainly speeds the ability for us to move clinical trials through the process. So about 15 years ago, we started working on point-to-point integrations. The first systems we really looked at were IRT, EDC, CTMS, and financial systems. And we had a lot of success in those days, moving away from paper-based to taking transactions that would occur via site data entry into an IRT or EDC system, taking those visit parameters usually, sending that over to the CTMS, which could then work with the reporting systems to get near real-time enrollment updates for screening, screen failure rates, dropout rates, etc. And then we took that one step further and were able to work out how to take visit information and help the study teams use that to process payments for sites. And so things started to move along. It was an exciting time. The challenge then were the ETL tools on the market were expensive. You had to buy, particularly at that time, you might have even had to buy hardware, but you certainly had to buy software, set it up. And so it was repeatable, but it wasn't necessarily configured for the clinical trial space. Custom code, we generated quite a bit of custom code, and that worked very well, but it wasn't scalable, and it wasn't something that we could modularize and really build a lot of intelligence around. And so we got a great start 15 years ago and had slowly advanced it, but it didn't really scale up with where we are today to go back to the 21 systems that we pointed out on the first slide. But the good things that it did is it eliminated duplicate data entry. So certainly we got buy-in from the business side. So if one system was populated, it could then it could be triggered to send information to other systems. So patient numbers, visit dates, and those things were able to eliminate the need for people to go to the same system multiple times to update the same data. And then it eventually gave us a better overall view of the study performance and where things were at any given time. Now, as we grew and started helping clients integrate more and more of these systems together, the volume certainly starts to increase. And managing changes, whether it's a protocol amendment, certainly we say there's three things that are certain in life: death, taxes, and protocol amendments. So you have to go into that with your eyes wide open, knowing that you're probably going to have some impact to one system or another, usually from the data entry side, which then would oftentimes affect the data integration side. And so finding what pieces of code or what configurations in an ETL tool had to be changed or updated became a lot of work and a lot of effort to manage all that. And then with the point-to-point integrations, sometimes if one system failed, it could impact the whole ecosystem. And so constant monitoring requires, which was expensive and timely and requires a lot of bodies to do that, and not many companies had that. And so we started, for this webinar, we wanted to pull together just some high-level information based on some recent assessments of some typical phase 3s that we've helped support. basically over about a 2-year period with those core, 15 or so systems that you might use on a phase 3, you end up having anywhere from 120 to 140,000 records generated that could cross systems. And typically we don't see a high error rate of corrupted files, usually less than 0.05%. But at that volume over 2 years, you may get one or somewhere between 1 to 10 records a week that may contain an error. Typically it's one, but what that means is somebody has to find that error. So by the time we would find that error, a couple hours had gone by, or maybe a day. Then you have to troubleshoot the error. Then you have to communicate with the vendor that sent the file. And so at the end of the week, it may have taken you 8 to 10 hours for that one study to solve their problem. And if you have 4 or 5 studies, it becomes a full-time job. Some of the larger, top 10 pharmas that we've worked with, they would typically have a backlog of 150,000 plus records in their error logs every single day. Of those, there may have been 20 or 30 that were causing the rest of the congestion, kind of like the picture of the traffic jam on the right hand side. Change management. So everybody's continuing to move forward and progress, and as you look at like we said, protocol amendments or system upgrades, that requires redevelopment or revalidation on every integration. And so point to point is no longer a solution that we recommend for anybody. It's just too burdensome to maintain. And so about 5 years ago, we really started looking at better ways to focus on the maintenance side. It's something that most people don't think about, but that is the piece that if you don't get that right, you will not be able to enjoy an integration platform that provides the business value that you're looking for. And so we started programming integration algorithms to help identify issues by mapping to referenceable errors that would happen. So if an error was triggered, we would have a list of data in a table somewhere that the system itself could look, and then it could carry out the next steps of how to either reprocess, communicate with the sender or the recipient, and really streamline the maintenance side. And what we started to see, this is kind of the steps of very low level AI for managing integration, and that's something that we're really expanding today, being able to pinpoint field by field how these things move through your ecosystem and help everybody process this information faster. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Jamie now to continue on the discussion.
Thanks, Sean. I'll share my screen here. Put it in presentation mode. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Hi, Jamie. We can see your PowerPoint, but we can't see it in full screen mode. Is it in full screen mode in the other monitor?
It is.
Okay, so I can send you control again, and all you'd have to do is select the other monitor, okay?
Okay.
All right, so I'll just take back control here, and right back to you, Jamie.
Okay, hopefully that's better.
Perfect.
Thanks, Nima. So I'd also like to start with a polling question.
All right, everyone. So our next polling question will be launched on your screen. And our polling question here is, for those with clinical trial integration experience, what challenges have you faced? And now we have 4 options here: unreliability, finding the source of problems or errors, maintenance, or all of the above. Again, I'd like to invite all audience members to vote in real time, and we'll take a look at the results. So once again, our question here is, for those with clinical trial integration experience, what challenges have you faced? Unreliability, finding the source of problems or errors, maintenance, or all of the above? All right, it looks like most of the audience has voted. Let's take a look at the results. All right, so our results show that 12% of audience members have selected our first option, unreliability. 20% of audience members have selected finding the source of problems or errors. 4% of the audience members have selected maintenance, and the majority of audience members have selected our last option, all of the above. And now right back at you, Jamie.
Thank you very much, Nima. I guess that's not really a surprise. I would say that falls pretty much in line with what we see on a daily basis when we're dealing with our customers. You know, they're seeing all of those kinds of issues: unreliability, maintaining their systems, and then finding and resolving their errors. So, Nima, did my screen switch?
No, Jamie, we're still on the poll question slide here. Is it switching on your end?
It is.
It is. Okay, so Jamie, I'm just going to take back control and pass it right back to you, okay? Yes, we can see the screen now. Perfect.
Great, thanks, Nima. So a simple way to envision a modern integration approach is through the use of a dongle. This is an example we like to use. You can see it here on your screen. In case you don't notice right away, that's a cute little pill there in the diagram. You're probably all familiar with the concept of a dongle in some format. Each cable in this image has a defined input method. You can plug many types of devices into one of the cables. And what happens when you plug your phone or tablet into one of these cables is a pretty standard response. So if you update the software on your iPhone to the latest release, or let's say you upgrade your phone, you can still plug it in to perform the same functions. So you don't need to know anything about whether you're plugging into a Mac machine or a Windows machine running Windows 10. If your friend needs to plug in their iPhone, you can just unplug yours and plug theirs in. They get the same expected response. Now, I typically try to avoid acronyms, but there's one I just can't get away from when we're talking about integrations, and that's API. So an API is not an active pharmaceutical ingredient, at least not for today. So an API, as we use it today, is an application programming interface. So if you hear me refer to APIs, just keep in mind that we're talking about integrations. Also, I may switch back and forth between the terms APIs and services. These are really two distinct things, but for the purpose of today, I'll be referring to them in a very general sense. So the dongle is a very simple way to envision a more modern way of thinking about integrations. So keep this concept of a dongle in mind as we talk a little bit more about what makes up a modern integration architecture. So first off, your integration services or APIs should be standardized. What this means is that they're well-defined and consistent. Consumers of the service can easily understand how to access the service and what the resulting request will return to them. They're also flexible or opaque. The purpose of each of these services remains constant, but updates can occur to both the provider and the consumer without breaking the integration. The underlying technology and location are irrelevant. What this means is that you don't care if it's an Oracle database, a Microsoft SQL database, a .NET app, a Java app. It's all invisible and irrelevant to you when using the service. Finally, it's reusable. The same service can be reused by multiple providers or consumers. Because it uses an open architecture, you can expose these services or APIs to other systems. So if we look at a simple example, let's say you've published an API which returns the number of enrolled subjects for a given study. Any number of consumers or systems can access this API, assuming they have the proper authorization, and retrieve the number of enrolled subjects. You don't need to write a separate integration for each system who wants this data. They simply need to know the location and the credentials. So this reusable open architecture is really what allows this approach to scale. Because what we want to avoid is that spaghetti diagram Sean showed earlier. So when we take this API approach, it provides us a whole bunch of benefits. Easier integrations means it's easier to eliminate silos, provide visibility across your systems. And by sharing data across your systems, you allow your users to see data in context, identify issues, immediately answer questions. And if your integrations are working as expected, they can rely on their reports. So we combine all this data from all of our systems and present that same data back to different parts of the organization. Your executives should really be looking at high-level data across the company. How are my therapeutic areas doing? Are our timelines being consistently met? Are we delivering at the same rate as our competitors? Your clinical teams, on the other hand, should be looking at operational data. Are my sites being initiated? Am I screening enough patients? Is my screen fail rate too high? This data is all very related. Both the executives and the operational folks should really be looking at the same version of the truth. Too often, they're comparing apples and oranges because they're looking at system-specific reports. So by effectively integrating your systems, you let your medical monitors and study managers focus on patients rather than on compiling spreadsheets. You let your IT staff come up with innovative ways to help your company rather than spending their day reprocessing integration files that aired out the night before. You reduce risk by eliminating manual data entry and data manipulation, and you promote standardization. And this is where a data governance plan comes into play. We're not going to talk a lot about a data governance plan today, but we have put some white papers out there about it. I suggest you to, if you're interested, to look those up. So you can quickly identify potential issues and take action. Unreliable integrations cause your teams to lose faith in their reports. I've seen dozens of beautiful, informative dashboards and reports that go unused because the users can't rely on the data supplying them. So adding vendors to your clinical ecosystem is typically not very easy, at least it didn't used to be easy, but it doesn't have to be that way anymore. So your IT folks will be happy to discover that it's very possible that adding a new system can require little to no actual integration development. If you've already built your APIs to provide or consume the data, then they can just be reused. So again, a service to add or retrieve a particular data set to a system can be used by multiple systems. This leads to the potential, again, for zero actual development when adding new vendors and or internal systems to your clinical ecosystem. So this plug and play approach that we're talking about with an open architecture allows you to publish your APIs, thereby telling other systems or vendors what they need to do to send or receive data, as well as what they can expect back. So again, the underlying technology stack is irrelevant to connecting systems. They don't care. Replacing vendors or systems is very similar. I've been on system replacement projects for some large pharma companies that actually took years to complete. And that's not an exaggeration, they took years. And most of this effort and time was due to very system-specific, system-based point-to-point integrations. So we hear time and time, again, of sponsors who are handcuffed to a particular system because replacing it would be too difficult and costly. So a plug and play approach allows you to reuse your existing integrations rather than creating them from scratch each time. You can swap out one of your IT vendors for another with literally no development on your part. Your published APIs are made available to your new vendor and they're up and running. Error remediation, I was a little surprised that we didn't see more people single out error remediation, but I guess it kind of fell into the all bucket. As Sean was mentioning, this is where you see a lot of waste, a lot of time is spent in this area. So you've gone live with the integrations, data's moving back and forth between your systems throughout the day. What happens when an error occurs? And there's multiple types of errors that can occur, from things like systems being unavailable to specific business rules being violated. Sean mentioned managing and resolving these errors can take quite a bit of effort, especially when you fall behind. As someone whose job it was to support these integrations for a couple different sponsors, I can attest that a backlog of errors can snowball on you very quickly. So that's why when you design your integrations, you should design them for failure. What I mean by this is that you need to plan for how to handle failures when they occur, because there's one thing we know is that errors are going to occur. So as Sean mentioned, we're currently using this approach within Y Prime for all of our integrations. This is for integrating with our sponsors, other vendors, and even between our own systems. We know errors are going to occur, so we've developed a library of our most common errors we encounter on a daily basis, and we've developed automated procedures for handling them and or immediately notifying the appropriate parties. So as Sean mentioned, we end up with this form of artificial intelligence to handle a large majority of our integration issues. So he also showed some statistics earlier that give you an idea of the kind of error volume we're talking about. Supporting multiple integrations for just 4 studies can actually turn into enough work for an FTE. So our internal goal here at Y Prime is to handle over 80% of all integrations with no human intervention. So we look at the most common errors we're receiving and then look into how to automatically handle those errors. Each error type should have a design method to handle it. Some can simply be reprocessed. Some may need to alert a vendor or a system owner. Some may require a specific business rule be implemented, but we try to automate that as much as possible. Now, you won't be able to automate every type of issue resolution, but even when raising errors to your vendors or internally, you should ensure that you're providing them enough information for them to act on. An error occurred emails don't really provide much guidance. It's hard for them to act on that. So why are we doing all this? Why are we spending all of our time and energy and money integrating our systems? We're doing it so that we can get access to our data to be able to make informed decisions. We need to know when we have a problem as soon as possible. So viewing data in a vacuum doesn't give you context. Viewing a report from an IRT system may not give you context. It also may not allow you to identify the root cause of an issue. Scrolling through several Excel spreadsheets or line listing reports to search for outliers is a time-consuming and risky way to manage your studies. Staring at a number of metrics with no indication of their relation to expectations is pointless. So a quick example, your data tells you that you've enrolled 74% of your patients. Is that good? Are we ahead of schedule? Are we behind schedule? Exception-based reporting allows you to focus on the errors that need attention. So if we're at 74%, then we're behind schedule. We should know that. We should be able to see that right away. This might mean that your database lock is going to be pushed out by 3 months. It also might mean that your total budget is higher than expected. At this rate, you might be exceeding your budget by 25% by the end of the study. So as we start to look deeper, we want to find out why our enrollment's behind. If we can look at the data from multiple systems combined, we can see that, possibly, we've screened more patients than we expected to. However, we see that our screen fail rate is higher than we expected. So it doesn't necessarily appear that it's a recruitment issue. So we want to drill into the issues. Drilling down, in this particular example, let's say we see that the EU, Japan, and the rest of the world screen fail rates are all better than, or at least as expected. So it's only the US that's high. So the majority of your US sites have higher than expected screen fail rates. So maybe the US screening requirements are stricter than elsewhere. And you can keep this going down and down and drilling, going down the rabbit hole and drilling through the deeper and deeper data. And the point of this is that when you answer one question, you typically ask 5 more, and you need to have that data at your fingertips. So if you only have reports showing data from one system, eventually you're not going to be able to answer the follow-up questions. And if you have to sort through hundreds of line listings to even notice the issue, you may not even get to the follow-up questions and the underlying root cause. So once you've got a smooth integration engine up and running, you'll start to reap the benefits in your reporting. And well-designed reports is really what shows the fruits of your labor. So if we look at a quick case study, we've seen this scenario many times over the past few years. This particular example is a mid-sized pharma company with a fairly established set of vendors. Integration wasn't yet fully adopted throughout the organization. And what this meant was that every other Friday, the study manager would get a report emailed to them from the CRO CTMS. And this report contained a list of subjects, their status, and some other demographic information. And the study managers kind of used this report as the basis for the report that they were going to build. They then log into their EDC system, and they'd extract a dozen, sometimes 24 data listings, depending on the study. Then they'd go into their IRT and run a report. Then they'd go get a scheduled data dump from their eCOA vendor and combine that along with the CSV dump that they received in their email yesterday from their lab. Then they spend all day, every other Friday, combining all of these spreadsheets into one meaningful report that showed them a profile of each subject. So you can quickly see the problems with this approach. You have a high-priced employee spending a significant amount of time performing a task that is very error-prone, and by the time they finished, the data that they're looking at isn't even up to date. So it took them so long to compile it that it's not even up to date anymore. So the study managers eventually complained loud enough that IT agreed to look into a more scalable solution. So enter integration. Some, but not all this data was available via web service. The IRT and EDC vendors were major players who had pretty established, easy accessible web APIs. The solution involves system integrations along with an operational data store, or ODS, and a dashboard reporting environment built using business objects. A series of reports allowed the study manager to have visibility into the status of each subject and then to be able to quickly identify exceptions. Whereas in the past, these exceptions were really based on a combination of manual Excel formulas and the study manager having a keen eye for detail. Now their attention would be immediately drawn to the high blood pressure results, or changes in dosage, or missed visits, or adverse events. These reports were exportable to PDF and included bookmarks so that the study managers could easily navigate to a particular subject and review all the relevant lab doses or lab results, doses, AEs, etc. Now, for those study managers who love to manipulate data in Excel, which is most of the study managers I've met, we also included that raw data in Excel format as part of every report. So then they can still play with the data if they like. The entire process from requirements to initial report availability took about 6 weeks to implement, and it's been running now for about 3 years. So since then, we've added a bunch of additional reports and functionality. We've even plugged in a safety system, which now gives the study managers access to even more data. So today, this information is available to the study managers with a click of a button. Their amount of effort has been reduced to the time it takes them to log into a website. So they can spend their time managing their studies instead of manually compiling spreadsheets. Using a conservative estimate on the number of hours per month and the cost of a study manager, this sponsor estimates they saved over $70,000 per study over the past 3 years. And that's not even factoring in savings by reducing the risk of having study managers miss potential issues because they're sorting through line listings or they're making errors in their Excel formulas. So what's next? As Sean mentioned, even more data, more studies, larger studies, more data points from those studies. The addition of mobile devices and electronic health records means that the amount of data we're gathering is going to grow at an exponential rate. Imagine a mobile device recording a subject's activity level, or the weather at their location, or their heart rate throughout the day. some of the things we're working on with sponsors these days include integrating temperature excursions with our IRT system to validate a kit's temperature integrity for packaging and labeling through site delivery. We're integrating with UPS to ensure sponsors have drug on site for a patient coming in tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We've already implemented automated data monitoring with our eCOA, which proactively alerts sponsors when issues arise. We're also doing work with sponsors right now with our eCOA platform to gamify the patient's experience. And really, this results in better compliance and happier patients, and therefore better quality data. And you can take that gamification concept and implement it for your study teams for their daily tasks as well. And our IRT clients are already using their phones and tablets to check their drug inventory, recruitment, and patient compliance while sitting in a conference out of town. So this is taking data from many clinical systems and allowing them to view it on their phone while sitting in a conference. So in summary, integrations are becoming more and more critical as the volume of data increases. Most organizations have outgrown point-to-point solutions. They're costly to implement, they're difficult, and even more costly to maintain. Modern integrations provide flexibility and scalability that allow you to effectively and efficiently integrate your systems. And exception-based reporting allows you to quickly identify risks and then drill down to get your questions answered. So thank you very much for attending. At this point, perhaps we have time for some questions. Nima?
Yes, thank you very much for your insightful presentation. Now I would like to invite our audience to continue sending in their questions or comments using the questions window for the Q&A portion of this webinar. I've already received a few, so let's start with those. Okay, so our first question here is, how is security implemented in your integration service?
So we typically use a lot of the industry standard security mechanisms like OAuth, authentication. We also see Okta a lot these days, Office 365, ExoStar, and some others as well. And then we also typically provide row-level security. And a good example of something like that would be only returning sites that a user has been granted access to. So, for example, if you call an API to get a list of sites, you would only get back the list for the sites that you have access to.
All right, thank you so much for that answer. Our next question here is, what happens if a third-party server goes down?
So we touched on this a little bit earlier. And what we suggest using is both a passive and active monitoring plan. So you can be constantly checking servers for responsiveness. If you don't get a response, you have a chance to make the system owner aware immediately. And that's possibly before you even have an integration occurring. So if you're constantly checking, you see it goes down, you have a chance to notify the vendor or the system owner and correct the issue before you even need to use the service. And again, when you're sending out these errors, you want to make sure that when you're notifying the system owners, you want to make sure that you send them enough information for them to act on as well. I can't stress that enough. And then you should probably also have some kind of retry process in place. So a lot of times you'll ping a server or a system and it'll look down. You probably see that when you try to access a website. Sometimes it appears to be down, but you just retry and then it's back up. We like to call those blips. So you should probably also have a retry process in place as well.
All right, thank you so much for that answer. Our next question here is, can you apply customized business rules to services like this one?
Yes, you can. There's typically a business layer to this whole integration approach where you would put business rules.
All right, and our next question here is, how long does it take to develop a new connection for this service? So
if you're talking, if if this connection already exists, so let's say we're talking about integrating with an EDC system for a new study. In that case, it doesn't take any development time at all. You know, you've already got that web API or service up and running, so that actually takes no time. Let's say you're integrating with a new set of data for a new system. In our experience, we like to plan for about 2 weeks of development to get one of those up and running. And then again, once you've built it, it's now reusable.
All right, thank you so much for that answer. Our next question here is, how long does it take to build a custom dashboard?
That's a good question, and that really varies from client to client, and we have to really understand what we mean by dashboard. I think a lot of times there's some confusion over what's a dashboard and what's a report. We typically these days like to use, we're a Microsoft Azure shop. We use Power BI, which is a really a new way to report, and you know, they're getting a lot of good reviews if you've been reading the press. It's very easy to use, and you can actually do things very quick. So, you know, if we're talking just the dashboard part, and if we look at the entire process from requirements gathering to actual development and validation, we're probably talking about, I'd say, 2 to 4 weeks.
And all of that is.
Go ahead, Sean.
I was just going to add to that, Jamie, that assumes that the data is in place and already combined. So certainly you got to look at that first. And once you have your integration platform, the business value of setting up new dashboards and new reports is realized, as Jamie had stated during his presentation.
Okay, thank you so much for those answers. And our next question here is, are there any vendors you can't integrate with?
So we like to say if they have APIs, we can integrate with them. Having said that, you know, a lot of your vendors probably aren't, they're not using a lot of modern technologies. We still work with a lot of vendors who request CSV files or want to send you CSV files or XML files. That's fine. You can still integrate with those. Your entire ecosystem doesn't need to be web APIs. So you want to have a platform that can handle your legacy methods of integrating data along with web API. So the short answer is no. If the vendor can integrate or can get you data, then we can integrate with it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for those answers. We've reached the end of the question and answer portion for this webinar. If your question wasn't attended to during the Q&A session, the team from Y-Prime will do their best to follow up with you after the webinar. If you have any further questions, please direct them to the email addresses that are showing on your screen right now. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's conference. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Xtalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers by sending a quick message in the chat panel. We hope you found this conference informative. Have a great day, everyone.